Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the resources you're looking at and really try to dig in together, pull out those key insights for a deeper understanding. So today we're stepping into Lysa TerKeurst's book, Forgiving What You Can't Forget. It's quite a title.
It really is.
Our mission, if you will, is to walk through the whole thing, not just skim it, but really pull out the core wisdom. We'll use examples from the book to try and make sense of these, complex ideas around forgiveness and healing.
And it's a topic that just resonates, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Dealing with those really deep hurts, the ones that stick with you, how do you actually forgive when forgetting just isn't an option?
Exactly. And you see that impact right away in the endorsements. Craig Groeschel calls it invaluable. Tracy W. says it's breathtakingly beautiful. Stephanie A. sees it as a go-to.
Yeah.
What really struck me, though, was Kimberly F.'s comment. She mentions causing hurt in her own marriage and finding the book insightful.
Yeah.
It just shows how this struggle hits from all sides.
Absolutely. And then there's the dedication right at the start to Brian Hampton. It signals straight away, this is personal. This isn't just theory. It's coming from a place of lived experience,
Definitely. Okay, so let's dive right in. The introduction hits you immediately with this idea of before and after, these life-altering moments.
BC and AD, she calls them. Before crisis and after devastation.
Right. And she lists examples. A shocking conversation, finding something out, that awful phone call about an accident, divorce, suicide, malpractice, a nasty remark, theft, being fired, just devastating things.
The things that fundamentally change your life's timeline.
Yeah, they draw a line. And what's tough is how they contain even the good memories from before. Like those phone memory movies, suddenly a happy picture just brings all the pain back.
Oh, absolutely. You're just going about your day, maybe feeling okay, and then boom, a memory hits, and you feel so isolated because everyone else seems fine, but you're right back in that devastation.
TerKeurst shares that herself, crying over past hurts even after things were restored. And that's key, this book, is for when it's not easy. When forgetting isn't possible and forgiveness feels, almost impossible. She really validates your pain, the listener's pain, whatever caused that before and after. She affirms that what happened was wrong.
And there's this powerful desire she mentions, wanting to reclaim those good memories tied to painful times. The wedding album before the split, the vacation before the crisis, the happy Christmas card.
Right.
These were real moments of joy. The pain shouldn't get to erase them or poison the future. It's about not letting the devastation win, essentially.
So chapter 1 gets right into forgiveness itself, calling it this double-edged word. She talks about her own experience being ripped open emotionally during her marriage troubles.
And how that pain wasn't contained, right? It spills over onto her kids, her health, finances, legal stuff. Just total upheaval.
Yeah.
And out of that hurt, coping mechanisms pop up. She talks about cynicism acting like a security guard. You put it up to protect yourself, but ultimately, it keeps intimacy out with people. Even with God, it creates distance.
She tells that story about the college parking lot protest. Sounds almost silly in comparison to deep hurts, but it illustrates the point.
Yeah, she stayed behind, wanting to make a point over something small, and just missed out on everything.
Exactly. And while, the listener's pain is likely way more serious, the principle holds. Holding on to offenses, big or small, isolates you. You miss out.
And that's the double-edged part. Forgiveness is so hard to give sometimes, but amazing to receive. And there's that weight, too, receiving forgiveness, maybe from God, but then struggling to give it.
She brings in Adam and Eve, how they reacted after sinning, hiding, shame, blame.
Yeah, it's like our first instinct when wronged, that primal reaction to withdraw, maybe hide from the pain or the consequences.
And the book lists reasons why forgiveness feels impossible. It's a really helpful list. Fear it'll happen again, wanting control, feeling like forgiveness invalidates the pain.
Or trivializes it. Yeah, hostility, not feeling ready, the other person not admitting fault, the relationship still being unsafe.
Or feeling it's futile, or the person's even passed away, or just not seeing any good coming from it. Real barriers.
Definitely real.
And it's crucial to get that this isn't a simple fix she's offering. Forgiveness is complex. It applies to everything from tiny annoyances to, massive betrayals.
And she warns against what her counselor called hyper-spiritualizing the pain.
Right. Using spiritual language to kind of bypass the actual feeling and healing.
Exactly. Like saying, oh, God's got this. Or I've moved on. But inside, you're still really hurting. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches.
She shares that raw moment, journaling about forgiveness, thinking she gets it, then just slamming a door over and over in anger.
Wow.
It shows that gap, right? Between knowing something intellectually and actually living it emotionally. Our feelings are real.
And that leads into this idea of resurrected hope, or RH.
Right.
It's like a third marker in time, not just BC and AD, but moving towards hope again.
It's not ignoring the past, but looking forward.
Yeah, and she
Yeah.
uses that car analogy. You decide you like a certain car.
And suddenly you see it everywhere.
Exactly. They were always there, but now you're looking for them. Hope is like that, she argues. What we look for is what we will see. Actively seeking hope changes your perspective, shapes your reality.
So chapter 4 asks that big question. How is forgiveness possible when the pain is overwhelming, especially when the other person isn't sorry?
Right. She talks about that conversation with her counselor, Jim, just laying out how impossible it felt.
And Jim brings up those Bible stories, the lame man at Bethesda, the blind man at Siloam.
Yeah, powerful examples. Their healing happened because they obeyed Jesus' instruction. It wasn't dependent on anyone else apologizing or even understanding.
That's such a key takeaway for you, the listener. Your healing, your path to forgiveness, it can be between you and God. It doesn't have to wait for the other person.
Your healing isn't contingent on their repentance or fairness.
And TerKeurst shares a very practical thing she did. She made a list. Specific offenses. Wow. And she'd say out loud, I forgive this thing. And then add something like, and whatever my feelings don't yet allow for, Jesus' grace covers.
So it's an act of will, not necessarily immediate feeling.
Exactly. Willingness. Acknowledging the pain, but choosing to cooperate with forgiveness. Giving voice to the hurt to reclaim dignity.
That makes sense. Then the book shifts a bit, looking at how our past shapes these present struggles, our experiences, our beliefs.
She talks about her own mother's difficult childhood, born while her mom was in a sanatorium, orphanage time, raised by her grandmother, that history leaves a mark.
Yeah, it shapes perspective, coping mechanisms.
Then she shares little bits of her own childhood close to her mom, her grandmother's quirks, adjusting to her sister, painting a picture of her formative years.
And that playground story,
Yeah.
that feels significant. Being called names, pushed down, or the teacher just brushing it off.
Yeah, that sense of vulnerability, maybe needing to protect yourself because the world doesn't always step in.
Which leads to those defense mechanisms. Sometimes we become what hurt us, like the mean kids,
Right.
or we just disappear emotionally.
Or keep score, hoarding the proof of how we were wronged.
Right, because these past hurts fundamentally shape what we believe about ourselves, God, forgiveness. She mentions that vulnerable talk with Art, her husband, about their past creating this tunnel of chaos in their marriage.
Affecting how they saw each other, how they reacted, and their different emotional upbringings, her family loud, his quiet. That created hurdles for intimacy.
Underlines how vital honesty and trust are in love.
Yeah.
And I love the image she uses from creation, dust and a rib becoming something wonderful. It's a reminder that our beginnings, even messy ones, don't dictate the final outcome. We can reevaluate how we see ourselves.
And Colette's story, dreading sunrises and sunsets because of past trauma.
It shows how these unrecognized connections can really limit joy, like Art's difficulty with emotional honesty. Loss shapes us, but it doesn't have to be only negative.
So the encouragement for you, the listener, is to look for those connections in your own story. Avoided times, places, people, words, topics.
Reclaiming those, bringing them into the light, is empowering. It's about not letting the past dictate the present through subconscious patterns.
Which brings us to boundaries in Chapter 9. So crucial when forgiveness is involved. She talks about feeling helpless watching a loved one make destructive choices, like trying to stop the rain, she says.
It's true. Those choices impact everyone around them, and the shift she talks about is key, moving from trying to control them to offering compassion while holding firm boundaries.
Yeah.
Caring without rescuing or enabling.
And she's clear. Forgiving doesn't mean ditching boundaries. Not at all. We're still responsible for our own reactions, our well-being. Forgiveness is internal work. Boundaries are external actions.
Yeah. And her example of losing it over the mail, even while writing about boundaries, it's so relatable. It shows it's an ongoing struggle. But the point is, boundaries protect us. They aren't meant to punish others. That phrase, adults inform, children explain.
That's powerful. Just state the boundary. Don't get drawn into endless justification.
Right. And the book gives practical steps. Mute social media. Refuse to cover lies. Say no. Be honest about your capacity. Limit contact with draining people. Avoid emotional spirals. Don't crumble under accusations.
Concrete actions for self-respect.
Exactly. It also tackles holding on to hope in tough times and clarifies that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending everything's fine or moving on without clarity about the hurt. You don't have to ignore reality.
Okay, chapter 10. This can be a tough one. Forgiving God. Exploring that struggle when prayers feel unanswered, especially when you're suffering deeply.
She quotes Jim Kress. Hope is the melody of the future. Faith is dancing to that melody right now. Forgiveness in this sense is staying in step with God's heart, even when you don't understand the music.
Right, like Jesus telling his disciples their grief would turn to joy. Their prayer for a Messiah was answered, just not how they expected a suffering servant, not a conquering king.
God's provision often looks different from our plans.
TerKeurst shares her own anxiety over that family business investment, feeling worried, wanting to pull back from family, even from God, because it felt like things were going wrong despite her concerns.
It highlights that need to trust God's provision, even when it doesn't match our expectations or understanding, leaning into faith when things are unclear.
And she clarifies, forgiving God isn't about God needing our forgiveness. He didn't do wrong.
Right.
It's about processing those times when our hurting hearts feel like God let us down or is unfair or doesn't care. It's wrestling with those feelings, that disappointment within our faith.
The book mentions the enemy's tactic, sowing doubt about God's goodness, going right back to Eve. Sin opened our eyes to good and evil, but only God sees the full picture, the eternal perspective.
So the call is to choose trust in God's goodness, even when circumstances are painful or confusing. She realized later God was working, answering prayers daily in ways she hadn't recognized during that hard time with art and the investment.
Seeing the unseen work later.
Yeah. Then the book moves into grief, and how unresolved grief, especially from someone else's actions, can curdle into bitterness.
Which might feel justified at first.
Right.
But it's corrosive. It ends up consuming the person holding it.
And bitterness is sneaky, she says. Hard to admit. So you need to name it, explore where it came from, trace it back to the original hurt. She even lists signs of hidden bitterness.
It's helpful to understand it often comes from hurt, not just hate. Often in tender hearts made to feel unsafe. The hardness is self-protection.
And revisiting the grief, actually allowing yourself to feel it, can be a way out of bitterness. Like her experience at the funeral, it brought tenderness, reconsideration.
And her regret about pulling away from that friend because of differences,
Yeah.
a reminder not to leave things unsaid.
Yeah, and she questions, just saying, I'll pray for you, suggesting a more present acknowledgement of shared grief is sometimes needed.
That anecdote about sending the card to someone estranged, feeling obligated, then getting disproportionately angry about an unrelated email.
It shows how that underlying bitterness just erupts unexpectedly.
Which connects to Jim Kress's quote. If our reaction is hysterical, it is historical. Intense reactions often link back to old, unhealed wounds. Bitterness is the accumulation of resentments, tainting everything.
So humility becomes essential. Without it, true forgiveness is basically impossible. Humility opens us to God's peace.
She uses the prodigal son's parable. The older, resentful brother was the most resistant to the father's grace. Bitterness turns us away from God.
Peace is the goal. Humility accepts unfairness happened, but trusts God anyway. It acknowledges others might never apologize, but our peace can't depend on that.
That verse, Romans 12:18, live peaceably with all, the emphasis is on our choices, our attitude, trying to be Christ-like even when it's hard.
And she admits that internal scream, right? But I am not Jesus.
Yeah, very human.
But bitterness hurts everyone. That Hebrews warning about a bitter root defiling many. It's serious.
So sending that card, despite mixed feelings, becomes an act of obedience, cooperating with God's process for her own freedom, even if the feelings weren't totally there yet.
Which leads to the prayer of confession and forgiveness as a daily practice, getting ahead of things before they take root.
Like Adam hiding in fear after sending a relatable reaction to messing up or being hurt.
And distinguishing between feeling an emotional anger, offense, resentment, and living in it, letting it define you.
Maturity isn't avoiding hard things, but letting them work for you, creating self-awareness, empathy, patience.
She offers that progress acronym as a reflection tool. Suppress, digress, regress, confess, forgiveness. Practical.
Very practical. And then there's that incredibly powerful story about the peace talk in Israel.
Yeah.
Women from completely different, often opposing backgrounds.
United only by deep shared loss.
Yes. And despite all the divisions, their shared humanity, their focus on listening to each other, it created this profound connection.
Making fruit jams together, and then deciding to give the money to those who had lost the most. That's forgiveness in action, without even needing the word.
Such a contrast to letting pain make us less compassionate and more convinced others are against us.
So bringing it all together, the book defines forgiveness as making the decision that the ones who hurt you no longer get to limit you, label you, or project the lies they believe about themselves onto you.
Reclaiming your narrative. Understanding that hurting people often project their own unhealed pain.
Yeah. Forgiveness means refusing to let their bitterness define or confine you.
And it circles back to humility, inviting God's strength, versus pride crowding God out. The biblical commands to forgive make sense because we have been forgiven so much.
It doesn't excuse the sin, but it releases the burden of revenge to God.
Right. And while forgiveness is always required internally, biblical reconciliation needs repentance. Sometimes relationships do need to change for safety, and the Bible addresses that. But forgiveness is still for our own healing.
And that point about feeling superior, if we feel better than someone, forgiveness is tough. Remembering our own need for grace makes it easier to extend it.
Self-forgiveness is often tied to difficulty fully receiving God's forgiveness. The enemy loves to keep us stuck in shame.
She found help by confessing sin, having a witness, and verbally accepting God's forgiveness. 3 key steps for her.
It really all comes back to forgiveness being the cornerstone of faith, possible because of Jesus.
Wow. That was a journey through the whole book. Lysa TerKeurst really does weave personal story and biblical truth together so effectively to tackle this huge topic.
Absolutely. And it's so practical. It's not just theory. It gives you, the listener, real tools and steps for your own journey of healing and forgiveness.
So we really hope you'll keep thinking about these ideas. Which parts resonated most? How do they connect with your own life, your own experiences?
Maybe revisiting certain chapters or looking up those Bible verses we mentioned. And remember the resources from Proverbs 31 Ministries, the Beauty of Forgiving download, the study worksheets. They could be helpful next steps.
And maybe just leave you with this final thought to mull over. What's one small step, just one thing you can do today to cooperate with forgiveness in your life, no matter how you feel right now?